I'd like to recognize the Chairman of the Natural Resources Committee, Mr. Westerman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Tiffany, and thank you, Chief, for being here today and for your testimony. I know you and I have a lot of common interests. You mentioned markets for wood products. I think that's extremely important, and I think there's a lot of areas we can work together on to make our federal lands more productive, make our forests more healthy, which will be beneficial all the way around. But as we're here to talk about your budget today, one item I saw in there was that the Forest Service budget proposes taking $1.6 million from hazardous fuels reduction and $6 million from wildfire preparedness for electric vehicles, which is a total of nearly $8 million. Chief, was that your decision, or did that come from above?
So maybe I can talk about the thinking behind that decision.
I've got to move quickly. I just need to know. Was that your decision, or did somebody else?
Well, Congressman, I support that decision.
Okay. I'm going to just move on then. There's been some recent research showing how much carbon catastrophic wildfires are emitting into the atmosphere. Are you familiar with the amount of carbon that was emitted during California's record-breaking 2020 wildfire season?
Not confidently, but I want to testify here today, but I'm familiar with it in general.
It's roughly 127 million metric tons. Do you know how many EVs the Forest Service would need to buy in order to offset 127 million metric tons of carbon emissions?
How much?
Well, based on the back of the napkin or back of the envelope calculations I did and some data from MIT that Mr. Chairman asked to submit this report to the record, the Federal Highway Administration, the number comes up to 62.8 million EVs to offset 127 million metric tons of carbon that would otherwise be emitted from internal combustion engine cars. Do you know the size of the entire Forest Service vehicle fleet? 18,284 vehicles. I did a lot of research for you here. Given the fact that the Forest Service would need to purchase almost 3,500 times more the amount of vehicles it currently owns in order to offset emissions from one state in 1 year from a carbon perspective, does it make sense to you that the Forest Service is taking money away from preventing megafires and instead of directing that money towards purchasing EVs?
I'm sorry, I missed the...
Does it make sense to purchase EVs instead of doing forest management when you look at the big climate picture?
Yeah, I think the whole picture is a bit more complex, Congressman, because it's not to replace all of our vehicles with electric vehicles. It's really looking at what portion that we may be able to replace. Because as you know, depending on where you are and the type of landscapes that we drive our vehicles, electric vehicles probably will not work in all of our locations.
I get all of that. I just think diverting $8 million from catastrophic wildfire to electric vehicles is a waste of taxpayer money, and it's more of a messaging than it is actually doing something to help the forest. Also, you all put a report out last week that talked a lot about mature and old growth forest. I went to forestry school, and I don't remember any definition of mature or old growth forest, yet the Forest Service is trying to define that now. Can you tell me briefly what a mature or an old growth forest is?
So when we looked at defining from a definition standpoint what old growth is, as you know, it depends on the species in terms of what defines an old growth. But if we could just talk plain here for a moment, it's those older trees. And like I say, depending on the species, but you're looking at trees 80 years or older in many of the species. Now, the report that was put out had to do with mature and old growth. And we were required under executive order to do an inventory.
So it was an executive order that required you to inventory something that science hasn't really been able to define. And I'm sorry to cut you off, but in that report on old growth, it states that, quote, narrative frameworks are going to inform the, quote, policy and practice of forest management for old growth. The report also includes the following, quote, the role of place, attachment, or identity, meaning, quote, the symbolic importance of a place as a repository for emotions and relationships that give meaning and purpose to life, may also be particularly relevant in our understanding of how people relate to and value old-growth forest. If that didn't make any sense, I read it over and over and over last night, and it still doesn't make any sense to me. Chief, I know your heart's in the right place and you want to do the right thing. Let's just get busy managing our forests, making them more fire resilient like I know you want to, getting those markets out there so that we can do management. And I'll support you any way I can in that. And again, thank you for your testimony and look forward to working with you going forward.
Thank you, Congressman.
Chairman yields. Next, I'd like to recognize the gentlewoman from New Mexico, Ms. Ledger Fernandez. You have 5 minutes.